Oh, hello there. Hope you're having a happy Halloween. Perhaps you're in need of some company, in which case I know exactly the type of people to introduce you to. That's right, our video is going to be about ghosts this time. In reality, I walked to America today, which in the end, it ended up being as impressive as it sounds, I think. So if I look kind of dead, then let's just say that's part of the video, because that is really what I'm feeling right now. But we're gonna do this anyway. We're gonna push ahead, and I'm gonna talk about Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo first of all. Let's put this down. Don't need it for now. This is the most recent ghost story I read, a Mexican classic. It's about Juan Preciado, whose dying mother tells him to find his father, Pedro Paramo, in the town Comala, where he's originally from. And so, where he's originally from. So he vows to her as a death, as she's dying, he vows to her to go back and find his father. So it begins with this sort of fairy tale like quest setting. And then when we get to Comala, Juan finds himself in another world, and we do too as readers. This is a world of shadows and whispers. Some pages, or some little sections are just whispered, hushed conversations, just dialogue with no kind of character to attribute them to, so that we feel like we're hearing the villagers speak almost through cracks in the walls or around the corner of a street where we can't quite see them or who's speaking. We just get snatches of life in Comala as it was before whatever happened to it to make it a ghost town, basically. So I think there should be more haunted town books, but definitely this is the best one I've read. I'm not sure if I've read many or any others, but it really is, I think, one of the most immersive books as well that I've read. It's got the sort of mystery to it of what happened to the town and who exactly was Pedro Paramo, who seems to be at the heart of everything evil and wrong with the town. Keeps you going. I think it's in a way kind of fast and page-turnery, because it's got all these stories bundled into it, little events of people's lives in the village. It's got a massive cast of characters to rival a Tolstoy novel while being really, really slim. And it's also really fragmented and disjointed in a way which makes it sort of modernist. And like I said, it's sort of page-turnery, but if you want to really understand what's going on, you need to take your time with it and let yourself just sink into the dry and dusty desert world of Comala. Then we have The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This begins like a classic Victorian Gothic novel. It's Christmas, I think, and people are gathered around the fire telling ghost stories, and one comes up which is based, I think, a second-hand account of a manuscript which was written about something that happened to a governess who got this job to work in a big mansion taking care of these two children whose father is away, I think, all the time. So it's got that nice kind of classic Gothic framing device before we get into the governess's account of what happened to her. And then it becomes so in her head that it becomes hard to tell what's supernatural and what's psychological, and the prose is the real star here. There's long, winding, convoluted sentences which describe what's going on in the house, and the creepy children and the strange the things that the children see, and the people that the children speak to who may or not be there, including the previous governess, Miss Jessel, who died. It creates this fog around what's actually happening. And so these long wordy descriptions, instead of giving us a clearer picture, actually make everything feel more vague and sinister and kind of unknowable. And that sort of psychological dimension that's in there as well makes it almost leaning in towards modernism, which is really interesting, I think, about this particular classic. But yeah, again, very atmospheric. More atmosphere than story in this one. Another classic haunted house take on the ghost story. We have The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Should have said the last one is Henry James. and maybe I did, I'm not sure. This one has more of an even balance, I think, between plot and atmosphere. It begins with, I think, is it an academic researcher or somebody who wants to investigate this haunted house? He sends out, it's not an ad, I think, he asks people who have certain experiences with paranormal activity before, or claim to anyways, and brings them to the house. The ghost in this one plays second role to the house itself. Like, the architecture of the house means that certain rooms just feel wrong. Like, one corner seems to be a little bit too big or too small, and there's a certain door which will always swing shut, and then there's something about the design which makes you get lost very, very easily, and doors kind of open into hallways where you wouldn't expect, and so on. At the beginning, it's just kind of a fun adventure, where the people are kind of there for the thrill of what's going to happen, and they're waiting to see what will happen, and they don't expect that anything actually dangerous could happen, but they're encouraged to feel free to leave the house at any point if they ever do feel that their safety is in question. And so then what's fascinating about the novel is the way that they don't leave. There's always the classic of get out of the house, why don't these people leave? But this novel really gets into the psychology of them, of why you would actually want to stay in such a place, especially through the lens of one of the characters, Eleanor, who's sort of the main character. Being in the house grants her a sort of freedom from her ordinary life, and the more that things seem to get dark and mysterious and ghosts get heard and seen, then the more she seems to be incapable of separating herself from the house itself and getting out of what is fast becoming a very dangerous situation. But let's leave it at that. While on the topic of haunted houses though, I want to mention House Taken Over, a short story by Argentinian writer Julio Cortázar, which is only, I think, 2 pages, but I still think is maybe the best haunted house story ever written. Because it's not really a haunted house, it's it's a very mysterious what is going on in this house. It's about a brother and sister who live together in a home, and slowly the home is being taken over by something, and we don't know what it is. But one day they find suddenly that they can't go into the attic or something like that, and then after a while it spreads to another set of rooms. So they have to lock those doors, and they just know, okay, well, things are a bit more inconvenient now because we can't get to the kitchen unless we go outside of the house and in through another door. But they just have to put up with it. And it's amazing because, this story, I don't know exactly what it distills, which is why it's so fascinating and good for me, but it distills something about haunted house things and about psychology and about feeling kind of trapped in spaces, but then getting used to, the unpleasant things that you have to deal with in living spaces, and your home as well, like a family home where things aren't as they used to be because something is off, which is also a staple of haunted houses and horror, I think. But yeah, it just taps into a lot of these sort of really primal emotions, and I think it just does it perfectly. Julio Cortázar writes a lot of disturbing short fiction, actually, really great short stories, kind of in the vein of Edgar Allan Poe, who he translated into Spanish originally, back in the day. So I'm sure I have probably Bestiary or one of his short story collections here for you to look at, as well as House Taken Over, another very disturbing and I find quite scary story is Secret Weapons. And in this one, again, it's not immediately clear if it's a ghost story or what's going on exactly. It's about this character in Paris, Pierre, and he's going with his girlfriend to a little house or something where her parents are away or something. So it's a summer house and they're going to spend some time there. But the main problem with Pierre is that he's sort of caught up in little details in his life that he can't find a meaning to. At the first scene is that he's just making the bed normally, but he's kind of asking himself, why exactly did I make the bed in this way? Why did I start with this corner and then go to that corner rather than the other way around? And the fact that this kind of bothers him shows us something is going on with this character, obviously, right? Why is everything exactly this way? Why did I touch this wall over here? Was it just by chance, or it seems like I should have done something else? And so it seems at first maybe he's just sort of overthinking things. And his girlfriend also seems to be a little bit worried about his behavior. But as things go on, obviously something more sinister is afoot. It's like he's being haunted by his own habits, which seem to almost be coming from something other than himself. And I want to leave it at that, although I will say, in my opinion, this is a ghost story, like a traditional ghost story, but like told in a very intriguing way and with a very, very horrifying ending, which is probably like, should be full of trigger warnings, which I won't give here because I don't want to spoil anything. But yeah, go in with caution, I guess, if you're of a sensitive disposition. But yeah, going from something horrifying like that to something horrifying in a totally different way, which is the horror of societal injustice in Yumiri's Tokyo Ueno station. This is about a homeless man who dies and then comes back as a ghost, and then finds that nothing has changed because he's still haunting the park in Tokyo, Ueno Park, and kind of going around the same areas in a sort of stream of consciousness-y experience between like the little impressionistic moments of the park and going back to his life, which is sort of flashing before his eyes as he tries to sort of understand what was the point of everything and why am I still here after dying. So the interesting thing about this, in a way, is that he doesn't need to be dead. He could have just been alive and you could have told the same story, but the fact that he's dead adds just a interesting, like, kind of melancholy, magical and tragic level to something which would otherwise be seen, I guess, a little bit more straightforward, kind of like sad story, like sad personal story which shows some injustices in society or something. This book didn't entirely work for me. I have a whole rambly long review video on it, but like there is definitely a lot in it which I think is good. And the central premise of this kind of ghost was maybe like kind of one of my favorite things about the book. So I think in a way it's worth your time maybe just for that idea, but probably I would recommend people read up a bit about it first, because like I said, this isn't kind of spooky thrills and it's not for everybody, I would say. Although it did win that prize. Anyway, next up, Heinrich von Kleist and his short story, a very short story, The Beggarwoman of Locarno. In this one, a lord in his castle or his manor goes, I think it's a castle, anyway, he goes out hunting, and while he's away, a beggar woman comes and asks for a place to rest. And she does rest, and when the lord comes back, he sees her and he's very displeased by seeing a beggar woman visibly like kind of on the floor, and he asks that she go and lie down behind the stove. And so she goes to make herself invisible, and as she goes, she trips and breaks a bone or something, and then she crawls behind the stove and eventually dies there. But then, after that, if anybody ever spends a night in that room, they'll always hear the sound of someone shuffling from one side of the room across to the other, behind and getting down and crawling behind the stove, like repeating the same motion, the same walk that the beggar woman did. And then obviously this leads to, well, the thing that's interesting about this story, and I actually didn't like this story so much when I read it the first time. In fact, I've only read it once, and I want to read it again because I initially wasn't going to include it. I just looked it up in case, because Kleist is one of my all-time favorite writers. And yeah, I read a few people, like, kind of their comments on it, and that made me view the whole thing differently, as you know, as it does when you hear other people talking about books that you like. They often like kind of unlock things that you hadn't thought of yourself. Kleist's kind of big theme is how people act when they reach the limits of their reason, or like when we reach the like kind of the limits of our sense of rationality and logic and morality and how the world should be. What happens when we see things which go outside of that? What effect does that have on people? That's one of the main things that comes back in his work. And I hadn't thought of this work, this little short story about the ghosts, in like fitting that at all. But like once you kind of realize that the ghost doesn't do much, and what's kind of dangerous and destructive, I should mention the first line of this mentions that the house gets burnt down, and it's the story of how the house got burnt down. What's dangerous and destructive is how people react, and how when dealing with this this phenomenon, this terrifying thing that they just can't fit into their own sense of reason. How they act is what's scary and leads to terrible things. So that's, yeah, once I realized that it fits his sort of his general theme, then now I kind of want to read it again. But yeah, you should read it too. Next up, I'm going to talk about the shades in the underworld in the Odyssey by Homer. So this one's obviously a little bit different, but it's kind of a haunting because it's where all the dead go, it's where all the ghosts are. Odysseus, to go forward on his journey, is told by the sea witch Circe that he needs to get advice from an old man, Tiresias, who can see the future and explain like basically what to do. But the problem is he's dead, and so he'll have to travel to the underworld on his boat and talk to him. And there's certain rules about what you can do in the underworld and what you can't do. But anyway, he gets there, and what's interesting about all the ghosts that he meets are that, like, if you compare to the ghosts in these stories, they're often connected to the past. They're often like stuck in something that's happened and like repeating it and bringing the past into the present and not letting the past fade away from the present, which is what makes them scary. There's something which is always recurring, which can never die and just like kind of move on. Whereas in the Odyssey, Odysseus has been away for so long that the ghosts give him news about the present. So, for example, the king Agamemnon, his general, when he was fighting at Troy, he went home. They went home together, like to different areas. So his idea was that, of course, Agamemnon had arrived while he'd gotten lost. But then it turns out, when he finds the ghost, was that King Agamemnon died. He was murdered by his wife in the bath when he got home. So Agamemnon tells him, like, watch out, like even if you get home, your wife might stab you. So yeah, be careful. And like the ghost is actually giving him a new kind of sense of what the present might hold and what the future might hold. Then he finds his mother there, which is like one of probably the saddest things in the whole poem. He finds his mother and he says, why are you here? You shouldn't be here, you should be home. And she's like, I'm sorry, I couldn't wait for you that long. And then of course he also meets Achilles, the hero whose values have now changed since he's died, since he was alive, which is very interesting. Anyway, the whole thing is more kind of sad and melancholy than spooky, but there's a good level of spookiness there as well. And I will do whatever I can to shoehorn the Greek myths into a list of books. Now these last three are different from the ghosts that came before, because all the ghosts up until now have been tethered to a place, whether it's the underworld or a house, or yeah, mostly houses, right? Or a town, right? But in this case, the ghosts are actually more mobile, let's say, haunting people rather than places. Like, for example, Sadako from The Ring by Koji Suzuki. This novel is kind of like, it's more, I think, like detective thriller than a horror novel, because it's not so scary, even though there's a clear ghost in it. Maybe everyone knows the story, but there's a cursed videotape, and if you watch it, then you will die in 7 days. The ghost of Sadako Yamamura will come for you, and you have just 7 days to live. And the thing that's in the book, which I think it's not in, I don't think any of the movie versions of it, at least not that I've seen, is that at the end of the videotape was found by some teenagers who went to like a little cabin in the woods, and they found the videotape like in the reception area, and they played it, and they taped, at the end of the tape there's like instructions which say, you will die in 7 days, but in order to not die in 7 days you have to do this, and then the tape cuts. So at some point the journalist, I was going to say detective, he's a journalist who's watched the tape and who is trying to solve what's happening before his time runs out, realizes that the teenagers have taped over what happened. So probably as a prank, they just thought it'd be really funny to tape over the little key at the end, or the little thing that you're meant to do so you don't die, because they thought it wasn't real. But then it was real, and all of them are dead now, so there's absolutely no way to know what to do. You have to do something, and then the Sadako won't come for you. So the whole book is the journalist getting information on Sadako Yamamura, trying to find out who she was in real life, what happened to her and what on earth you can do to try and get this taped over clue. I really loved the book when I read it. It was like really fun, like kind of fast paced. It was chilling. It did scare me, but yeah, like in a sort of detective thriller way of like tension as the days sort of count down, even though I knew what was going to happen. I liked it so much I wanted to continue with the trilogy, but the second book, Spiral I think it's called, I absolutely hated it. I hated it so much. It's like one of the only books I've ever given 1 star to on Goodreads, because I don't really 1 star something, because if I don't like a book it'll just be 2 stars. I have to really like viscerally hate it to give it the 1 star. But this was one of them. So yeah, maybe don't continue past the first book, but the first book by itself is great and it has a great ending, so you don't have to go on from that. Then we move on to Winterwood by Patrick McCabe. This is also kind of a thriller. The premise is a journalist is sent back to do a job, to write a piece on his hometown, a little rural village in Ireland, and his aim, his mission is to capture the disappearing old Ireland, the sort of folkloric, rural, traditional life of Ireland, which is starting to fade and disappear in the 1990s. I think the book starts. It kind of traces time in an interesting way, but it's a bit fragmented as well, but basically moves forward, I think, from the 80s into the 2000s. But anyway, he goes to the town, and he meets this charismatic fiddler who everyone says is sort of the life of the town now, and he's always sort of singing the old songs, and he's never going to let go of the old ways, and everyone's glad he's there because he's sort of like the symbol of everything that's good about old Ireland. And so the journalist starts hanging out with him, going to his house and having long conversations with him, and we start to see sort of unpleasant, not just cranky, but almost threatening, violent, above all, I think, sinister side to this fiddler. That's the opening, and it's a really good setup. And soon afterwards, the journalist is being haunted by a ghost. The ghost is sort of like more appears almost in the form of anxiety attacks at some points, which I think were really, really well written, and like kind of hallucinatory, depressive episodes that he seems to go into at different points in his life. It's appropriate because this book is sort of like horror for Irish expats or urbanites who are like kind of disconnected from what Ireland was like before the modernization that really kind of exploded, I think, in the 1990s, and the way the country has changed so rapidly. And so, like, yeah, in a way, it reads like a traditional thriller after that really kind of great hook at the beginning, and that won't be for everyone because the plot itself is quite predictable. But on the other hand, it's kind of jumping around in time and giving you this almost satirical look at the way that Ireland has developed and the way that Ireland looks at itself and the way that sort of, like Irish people are sort of haunted by this other part of Irishness. It won't be for everybody, but it was absolutely 100% for me. And there are some really chilling moments, especially towards the end, where the narration starts to become a little bit, well, I won't go into it, but yeah, I'll leave it for anybody who wants to find out. But let's finally end with another big classic, and when it comes to William Shakespeare, I think the famous ghost is Hamlet's dad, or else Banquo from Macbeth. But the one that I'm going to talk about is the one that I read really recently, which is Julius Caesar. I reread this last year and I had completely forgotten that there's a ghost in it. The play details this political conspiracy to overthrow Julius Caesar, who is not emperor but like dictator of Rome at the time. Yeah, Brutus is one of the conspirators, the least willing one who gets drawn into the group. But the fact that after they kill Caesar, the ghost comes back to haunt Brutus is really appropriate because this play had so much Gothic vibes that I was completely floored by it. I did not remember that there's these incredible storms where people see the graves opening and the dead walking and fire in the sky and like the crack of lightning and thunder is just like, you can really feel it viscerally, and the characters are trembling, and there's this sense for all of Rome that these portents, these like kind of terrifying Gothic portents, mean that something incredibly huge is happening socio-politically. So the way that they kind of, Shakespeare manages to mix the Gothic with the political is I think really unusual and kind of unique, and I love that play for it. Maybe for me it's like the standout thing. But I think the thing I like most about the ghost of Julius Caesar, most about the ghost, is how he responds when Brutus sees him and says, "What are you?" Caesar says, "Thy evil spirit." And I think that just encapsulates like basically all the ghosts I think that we talked about today, like in that, and ghosts in general. That thy evil spirit, it's so succinct because it's, the ambiguity of, does it mean the spirit that belongs to you, the external haunting that is attached to you, or does it literally mean your own spirit, something internal and psychological? In this case, Brutus's guilt for having killed his friend and having kind of led the country in a direction which has led to turmoil rather than stability and so on. Also, it's just cool to think of like a Roman ghost. I think I tried to make a list with a lot of variety here rather than just Victorians in their houses. I think the reason I made this list was actually I saw a Stephen Fry video promoting his new ghost story book, which has come out, and like he's all of his stories are, he says his ghost stories that he recommends are things that he grew up listening to or reading, and they're all kind of Victorian ghost stories, which are great, and I included the Henry James here, Turn of the Screw, right? But I wanted to get a bit more variety. I wanted to get my Mexican ghosts, I wanted to get my Roman ghosts, I wanted to get my homeless Japanese ghosts, right? Like, the ghosts are too flexible and wonderful, like kind of a concept to limit to Victorian houses, I think. But anyway, thank you very much for listening. I hope you're having a lovely Halloween. What I'm going to be reading for Halloween is Censor, a book of manga by Ito Junji, which had just come out when I left Japan about, I think, 3 years ago. 3 years? 4 years? I've lost sense of time now. But yeah, and it's about someone who goes to a village in Japan where angel-like hair seems to fall from the sky onto the village, and that's all I know about it. It's a weird premise and I'm really looking forward to it. Anyway, hope you're reading something lovely for Halloween. Thank you very much for watching as always. Let's chat down in the comments and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.